The sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the dusty streets in shades of amber and gold, when young Tommy Fletcher's trembling voice shattered the evening calm. The 8-year-old boy stood in the middle of Main Street, tears streaming down his dirt-stained cheeks, pointing a shaking finger at the grand mansion that dominated the hill overlooking their small town. "Hi, how are you? I'm interrupting quickly just to ask you to click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. This will help a lot. Thank you, and I hope you like the story." "He hurt me," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible above the evening breeze. "Mr. Blackwood, he hurt me real bad." The few townspeople who heard the boy's words froze in their tracks. Charles Blackwood wasn't just any man. He was the wealthiest, most powerful figure in 3 counties. He owned the bank, the general store, the railroad depot, and half the cattle ranches surrounding Millbrook. His word was law, his influence absolute. Rancher, a weathered man in his mid-40s with steel-gray eyes and hands scarred from decades of hard work, was loading supplies into his wagon when he heard the commotion. He'd been coming to town less frequently these days, preferring the solitude of his remote ranch to the politics and gossip of Millbrook. But something in the boy's voice, a raw, desperate honesty, made him stop and listen. The crowd that had gathered around Tommy began to disperse quickly, their faces pale with fear. Mrs. Henderson, the schoolteacher, hurried forward and tried to hush the boy, glancing nervously toward Blackwood's mansion. "Now, Tommy," she whispered urgently, "you shouldn't say such things. You must be confused, dear. Perhaps you had a bad dream." But Tommy shook his head violently. "No, it wasn't a dream. He said nobody would believe me. He said I was just a poor orphan boy and that he could do whatever he wanted." Rancher felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd seen that look in a child's eyes before, the haunted expression of someone who'd experienced something no child should ever endure. It was a look he recognized from his own reflection decades ago when he was just a boy himself. As the crowd continued to thin, Rancher noticed how quickly people averted their eyes from Tommy. The boy's guardian, old Pete Fletcher, wasn't around. He'd been laid up with a broken leg for weeks. Tommy was essentially alone in the world, just as Blackwood had said. Sheriff Morrison arrived on the scene, his badge gleaming in the fading light. He was a thin, nervous man who owed his position to Blackwood's political influence. "Now, what's all this commotion about?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew and didn't want to hear it. "The boy's making wild accusations," Mrs. Henderson said quickly. "I'm sure it's just childhood imagination running wild." Sheriff Morrison nodded eagerly. "That's right. Children say all sorts of things. Tommy, you need to get on home now and stop causing trouble." But as the sheriff reached for Tommy's arm, Rancher stepped forward. "Hold on there, Morrison. Maybe we should listen to what the boy has to say." The sheriff's face darkened. "This ain't your business, Rancher. You'd best stay out of it. When a child's crying for help, it becomes everyone's business," Rancher replied, his voice steady but firm. He knelt down to Tommy's level, his eyes gentle despite their intensity. "Son, can you tell me exactly what happened?" Tommy looked up at Rancher with a mixture of hope and terror. You believe me?" "I believe something happened that scared you real bad. Why don't you tell me about it?" Through broken sobs, Tommy explained how Mr. Blackwood had invited him to the mansion 3 days ago, claiming he wanted to discuss a job for the boy, sweeping floors, cleaning stables, anything to help Tommy earn some money. But once inside, Blackwood had locked the door and Tommy couldn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. The remaining townspeople shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered among themselves. Others shook their heads in disbelief. But Rancher saw the truth written in every line of the boy's face. "That's enough!" Sheriff Morrison snapped. "I won't stand here and listen to lies about Mr. Blackwood. He's done more for this town than any of us. Tommy, you're coming with me. We're going to sort this out right now." As Morrison reached for the boy again, Rancher stood up, his full height casting a long shadow. "I don't think so, Sheriff. The boy stays with me." "You can't just take him. You're not his guardian." "And neither are you," Rancher replied. "But I'm not about to let a scared child be bullied into silence." The tension in the street was palpable. People watched from their windows and doorways, afraid to get involved but unable to look away. This was the kind of confrontation that could change everything in a small town like Millbrook. Just then, a black carriage rolled down Main Street, its polished surface reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Charles Blackwood himself stepped out, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most people in Millbrook made in a year. He was a tall, imposing man with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they looked upon. "What seems to be the problem here, Sheriff?" Blackwood asked, his voice smooth as silk but with an underlying edge of steel. Sheriff Morrison practically stumbled over his words. "Nothing serious, Mr. Blackwood, sir. Just a boy with an overactive imagination. We're handling it." Blackwood's gaze fell on Tommy, who immediately cowered behind Rancher. "Ah, young Thomas. I heard there was some confusion about our meeting the other day. Perhaps the boy misunderstood our discussion about potential employment." "There was no misunderstanding," Rancher said, stepping protectively in front of Tommy. "The boy knows exactly what happened." Blackwood's eyes narrowed as he studied Rancher. "And you are?" "Someone who believes in protecting children from predators." A dangerous silence fell over the street. Blackwood's pleasant facade slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "That's quite an accusation, Mr. Rancher. And it's not an accusation. It's a promise. This boy is under my protection now." Blackwood smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I see. Well, Rancher, I hope you understand what you're getting yourself into. This town depends on my goodwill for its prosperity. It would be unfortunate if that goodwill were to be tested." The threat was clear, but Rancher didn't flinch. "Some things are more important than prosperity, Blackwood." As the two men faced off in the growing darkness, Tommy clutched at Rancher's coat, finally feeling like someone might actually protect him. But he could also sense the danger his rescuer was now in. Mr. Blackwood wasn't the kind of man who forgot slights or forgave challenges to his authority. The crowd began to disperse, people hurrying home to avoid being associated with the confrontation. Sheriff Morrison looked between Blackwood and Rancher uncertainly, clearly torn between his duty and his fear. "This isn't over," Blackwood said quietly. His words meant for Rancher alone. "You have no idea what you've just started." "Neither do you," Rancher replied. As Blackwood's carriage disappeared into the night, Rancher felt Tommy's small hand slip into his. The boy looked up at him with eyes full of gratitude and lingering fear. "What happens now?" Tommy whispered. Rancher looked down at the child, this brave little soul who'd found the courage to speak truth to power and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Now we make sure the truth comes out," he said, "no matter what it costs." But as they walked toward Rancher's wagon, Neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows near the general store, or the way that figure slipped away into the darkness to report what they'd witnessed. The battle for Tommy's truth was just beginning, and Blackwood had resources and allies that Rancher couldn't even imagine. The real question wasn't whether Rancher could protect Tommy. It was whether either of them would survive what was coming next. 3 days had passed since Tommy's accusation, and Millbrook felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Rancher had taken the boy back to his ranch, a modest spread about 5 miles outside town, where Tommy could feel safe while they figured out their next move. But safety, Rancher was learning, was a luxury they couldn't afford for long. The first sign of trouble came when Rancher rode into town for supplies. The general store, usually bustling with friendly chatter, fell silent the moment he walked through the door. Mrs. Patterson, who'd known him for 15 years, suddenly found urgent business in the back room. Other customers made excuses to leave, and when Rancher approached the counter, store owner Bill Hutchins looked everywhere except at his face. "I need flour, coffee, and some canned goods," Rancher said, placing his money on the counter. Hutchins fidgeted with his apron strings. "Well, now, that's the thing, Rancher. I'm not sure I can sell to you right now." "What do you mean?" "Mr. Blackwood came by yesterday, had a long talk with me about business relationships, said he was concerned about the store's reputation, what with all the wild stories going around." Rancher's jaw tightened. "So you're choosing Blackwood's money over doing what's right?" "It ain't about right or wrong," Hutchins burst out, then lowered his voice, glancing around nervously. "You don't understand what you're up against. Blackwood owns the bank that holds my mortgage. He controls the railroad. That brings my supplies. One word from him, and I'm finished." It was the same story at the blacksmith shop, the feed store, and even the saloon. Blackwood had moved quickly and efficiently, using his economic stranglehold on the town to isolate Rancher completely. By the time Rancher returned to his ranch empty-handed, he realized just how thorough Blackwood's influence really was. Tommy was waiting on the porch, his young face creased with worry. "Did you get the supplies?" "Not today, son. But don't worry. We'll figure something out." That night, as they sat by the fire sharing the last of their beans and hardtack, Tommy broke the silence. "This is all my fault, isn't it? I should never have said anything." Rancher set down his tin cup and looked at the boy seriously. "Tommy, listen to me. What happened to you wasn't your fault. And speaking up about it, that took more courage than most grown men have. Don't you ever apologize for telling the truth. But now you're in trouble because of me. I'm in trouble because I chose to do the right thing, and I'd make the same choice again every time." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "My pa used to say that before he died. He said doing right wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it." "Your pa sounds like he was a smart man." The next morning brought new challenges. Rancher woke to find his water well had been poisoned, dead fish floating on the surface, the water undrinkable. His fences had been cut during the night, and several of his cattle were missing. Worse, someone had left a note nailed to his front door. "Send the boy back where he belongs, or things will get worse." But the most devastating blow came when Dr. Matthews arrived at the ranch that afternoon. The elderly physician had been Tommy's only other ally in town, the one person besides Rancher who'd shown any willingness to examine the boy and document his injuries. Now he looked haggard and defeated. "I can't do it, Rancher," he said, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. "I can't examine the boy or provide any medical testimony." What happened, Doc? Matthew's hands shook as he spoke. Blackwood came to see me. Said he'd heard I was planning to spread malicious rumors about him. Reminded me that my medical license comes from the Territorial Board, a board where he has considerable influence. So you're just going to abandon Tommy? I'm 67 years old. I've spent my whole life building my practice, helping people. If I lose my license now, who's going to take care of this town's medical needs? Blackwood made it clear. One word from him, and I'm finished. After the doctor left, Rancher found Tommy sitting by the creek behind the house, throwing stones into the water with angry, frustrated motions. Everyone's scared of him, Tommy said without looking up. Maybe they're right to be. Fear's a powerful thing, Rancher agreed, sitting down beside him. But you know what's more powerful? Truth and courage, and people who refuse to give up. But what if we're the only ones? What if nobody else will help? Rancher was quiet for a long moment, watching the water flow over the rocks. You know, when I was about your age, something similar happened to me. Tommy looked up, surprised. Rancher had never talked about his past before. There was a man in my town, not as rich as Blackwood, but powerful enough. He hurt children and everyone knew it, but nobody would speak up. I tried to tell people what he did to me, but they called me a liar. Said I was just a troublemaker from a poor family. What happened? Nothing. He kept hurting kids and people kept looking the other way. Eventually, my family moved away and I spent years thinking it was my fault, that I should have tried harder, fought harder. Tommy threw another stone, this one landing with a particularly loud splash. So you think we should give up? No, Rancher said firmly. I think we should learn from my mistakes. I was alone back then, and I let that defeat me. But you're not alone, Tommy. And I'm not the same scared kid I used to be. That evening, as they prepared a meager dinner from their dwindling supplies, they heard horses approaching. Rancher grabbed his rifle and positioned himself by the window, motioning for Tommy to stay low. 3 riders emerged from the darkness. Sheriff Morrison and 2 of Blackwood's ranch hands. They stopped just outside the fence, close enough to be heard, but far enough to avoid any immediate confrontation. "Rancher!" Morrison called out. "I've got a warrant here for the boy's arrest." "On what charges?" Rancher shouted back. "Theft, Mr. Blackwood says the boy stole a valuable pocket watch during his visit to the mansion. Says he's got witnesses who saw Tommy take it." Rancher's blood ran cold. It was a clever move. If Tommy was arrested for theft, his credibility as a witness would be destroyed. Who would believe the word of a thief over that of a respected businessman? The boy never stole anything. That's for a judge to decide. Send him out and we'll handle this legal-like. Tommy appeared at Rancher's shoulder, his face pale but determined. "I never took anything from his house. I swear it. I know, son. This is just another one of Blackwood's games. What do we do?" Rancher looked at the boy, this brave child who'd already endured so much, and made a decision that would put them both in even greater danger. "We run." Within minutes, they had gathered their few remaining supplies and saddled Rancher's horse. As they slipped out the back of the ranch under cover of darkness, Rancher could hear Morrison and his men searching the house, growing increasingly frustrated when they found it empty. They rode hard through the night, heading for the hills where Rancher knew every trail and hiding place. But as dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, both of them knew they couldn't run forever. "Where are we going?" Tommy asked, his arms wrapped tightly around Rancher's waist as they rode. "To find someone who might actually listen," Rancher replied. "There's a federal marshal in Silver Creek. about 2 days' ride from here. If we can reach him, maybe we can get some real justice." But even as he spoke the words, Rancher wondered if they were just delaying the inevitable. Blackwood's reach was long, his influence vast. How far would they have to run before they found someone beyond his control? Behind them, smoke rose from the direction of Rancher's ranch. Whether it was from Morrison's search or something more sinister, they couldn't tell. But one thing was certain: there was no going back now. They were fugitives, running from a system that seemed determined to protect a predator and silence his victim. But they were also something else: two people who refused to let evil triumph, no matter the cost. The real test of their courage was just beginning. The abandoned mining camp of Cedar Ridge had been empty for nearly a decade, its buildings weathered and worn, but still standing against the elements. It was here that Rancher and Tommy took shelter on their second night as fugitives, hiding in what had once been the camp's general store while they planned their next move. Tommy had barely spoken since they'd fled the ranch, his young mind struggling to process how quickly his world had turned upside down. As they shared a can of beans by the light of a small, carefully concealed fire, Rancher noticed the boy's hands shaking. "You cold, son?" Tommy shook his head, but Rancher could see it wasn't the temperature that had him trembling. "I keep thinking, what if he's right? What if nobody will ever believe me?" "Hey." Rancher set down his spoon and looked Tommy in the eye. "You remember what I told you about courage? Sometimes it's not about feeling brave. Sometimes it's just about keeping going when everything inside you wants to quit." Before Tommy could respond, they heard the sound of a horse approaching. Rancher immediately doused the fire and grabbed his rifle, motioning for Tommy to hide behind an overturned table. Through a crack in the wall, he watched as a lone rider approached the camp. The figure was smaller than he'd expected, and as it drew closer, Rancher realized with surprise that it was a woman. She rode with the confidence of someone familiar with the frontier, her dark hair braided back and a rifle of her own resting across her saddle. "I know you're in there," she called out, her voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Sarah Chen, and I think we might be able to help each other." Rancher hesitated. It could be a trap. Blackwood was certainly clever enough to use an unexpected messenger, but something in the woman's tone suggested otherwise. "What do you want?" he called back, still keeping his rifle ready. "To talk about Charles Blackwood and about what really happened to that boy." After a tense moment, Rancher made his decision. He stepped out of the building, weapon lowered but ready, with Tommy close behind him. Sarah Chen was younger than her voice had suggested, probably in her early 30s, with intelligent dark eyes and the weathered hands of someone who worked for a living. She wore practical clothes, riding pants, boots, and a leather jacket that had seen better days. "Who are you?" Rancher asked. "A reporter for the Denver Post," she replied, dismounting slowly to show she meant no threat. "I've been investigating stories about Charles Blackwood for the better part of a year." Tommy stepped out from behind Rancher, his eyes wide with curiosity and hope. "You mean there are other stories?" Sarah's expression softened as she looked at the boy. "More than you might think, son. Blackwood's been very careful, very clever about covering his tracks, but patterns have a way of emerging if you know how to look for them." She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a leather portfolio. "Over the past 18 months, I've documented 7 separate incidents across 3 territories. Children who've gone missing, families who've been forced to leave town suddenly, witnesses who've changed their stories or disappeared entirely. Rancher felt a chill run down his spine. 7? That I can prove. I suspect there are more. Sarah opened the portfolio, revealing newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, and what appeared to be official documents. Blackwood has a system. He targets vulnerable children, orphans, kids from poor families, anyone who doesn't have powerful advocates. He uses his wealth and influence to silence anyone who might speak up. Tommy moved closer, staring at the papers with a mixture of fascination and horror. So I'm not the only one? No, sweetheart. You're not the only one. But you might be the first one brave enough to keep fighting back. Sarah explained that she'd been tracking Blackwood's movements, following a trail of suspicious incidents and unexplained disappearances. She'd arrived in Millbrook just as news of Tommy's accusation was spreading, and had been watching the situation unfold from a distance. I saw what happened in town, she said. How quickly everyone turned against you both. It's exactly what Blackwood wants: isolation, fear, the sense that resistance is futile. So what do you suggest we do? Rancher asked. Every door in Millbrook has been slammed in our faces. The sheriff's in Blackwood's pocket, and now they've got a warrant out for Tommy on trumped-up theft charges. Sarah smiled grimly. That's where things get interesting. You see, I've been in contact with a federal marshal named James Crawford. He's been investigating reports of corruption in territorial law enforcement, and Blackwood's name has come up more than once. She pulled out a telegram from her portfolio. Crawford is already on his way to Millbrook. Should arrive tomorrow evening. But here's the thing. Blackwood doesn't know about the federal investigation yet. If we can get Tommy's testimony to Crawford before Blackwood realizes what's happening, we might actually have a chance, Rancher finished. But their planning was interrupted by the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. Through the darkness, they could see torches, at least 6 riders moving with purpose toward the mining camp. They found us, Tommy whispered, his face pale with terror. Sarah was already moving, gathering her papers and heading for her horse. There's a back trail out of here. Follows the creek bed for about 2 miles before it connects with the main road. You know it? Rancher nodded. He'd explored these hills extensively during his years of solitude. Good. Take the boy and head for Silver Creek. There's an old church on the outskirts of town, St. Mary's. Meet me there tomorrow night at midnight. I'll bring Marshal Crawford. As the riders drew closer, they could hear Sheriff Morrison's voice calling out orders. Spread out! Check every building! They can't have gone far! The 3 of them mounted quickly, Sarah heading east while Rancher and Tommy took the creek trail to the north. As they rode through the shallow water, trying to muffle their horses' hoofbeats, Tommy looked back at the mining camp. Will she be okay? Sarah strikes me as someone who can take care of herself, Rancher replied. But privately, he worried. Blackwood's reach was long, and his methods were ruthless. They rode through the night, following game trails and creek beds, staying off the main roads where Morrison's posse might be waiting. By dawn, they had covered nearly 20 miles, and both horse and riders were exhausted. They took shelter in a grove of cottonwoods near a small stream, where they could rest and water their horse while keeping watch for pursuit. As Tommy slept fitfully against a tree trunk, Rancher found himself thinking about Sarah's revelations. 7 children. 7 families destroyed by one man's evil, protected by wealth and influence. How many more had there been that Sarah hadn't discovered? How many victims had suffered in silence, convinced that no one would believe them or help them? When Tommy woke, the sun was already beginning to set. They had one more night of travel ahead of them before their rendezvous at St. Mary's Church. "Do you really think this marshal will help us?" Tommy asked as they prepared to continue their journey. "I think Sarah believes he will, and right now, that's the best hope we've got." As they rode toward Silver Creek and their uncertain appointment with Justice, neither of them noticed the lone rider following at a distance, staying just far enough back to avoid detection. Blackwood's network of informants was more extensive than they'd realized, and their every move was being reported back to the man who seemed to control everything and everyone in their world. The trap was closing around them, but they weren't the only ones walking into danger. Sarah Chen had her own secrets, her own reasons for pursuing Blackwood so relentlessly. And Marshal Crawford's investigation had already put him on a collision course with forces more powerful and corrupt than even he realized. Tomorrow night would bring answers, but it would also bring a reckoning that would test everyone's courage to its absolute limit. St. Mary's Church sat on a hill overlooking Silver Creek, its white wooden steeple reaching toward a star-filled sky. The building had been abandoned for years, its congregation scattered when the town's silver mines played out, but it remained a landmark visible for miles around. Rancher and Tommy approached carefully, leading their horse on foot through the tall grass that surrounded the church. The midnight hour was approaching, and there was no sign of Sarah or the federal marshal she'd promised to bring. "Maybe they're not coming," Tommy whispered, his voice tight with anxiety. "They'll come," Rancher replied, though he felt his own doubts growing. Too much could have gone wrong. Sarah could have been captured, the marshal could have been bought off, or this could all be an elaborate trap. As they reached the church steps, the front door creaked open. Sarah Chen emerged from the shadows, but she wasn't alone. A tall man in a dark coat followed her, his badge glinting in the moonlight. "Marshal Crawford," the man introduced himself, extending his hand to Rancher. "Miss Chen has told me quite a story." Crawford was younger than Rancher had expected, probably in his late 30s, with keen gray eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. But there was something else in his expression, a weariness that spoke of too many cases where justice had been bought and sold. "Before we go any further," Crawford said, "I need to hear the boy's story directly. Miss Chen's evidence is compelling, but I need to know exactly what happened." They moved inside the church, where Sarah had set up a small lantern that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Tommy sat in the front pew, looking small and vulnerable in the vast, empty space. "Take your time, son," Crawford said gently. "Tell me everything you remember about your visit to Mr. Blackwood's house." Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper as he recounted the events of that terrible day. How Blackwood had invited him to the mansion under the pretense of offering work. How the man had locked the door and... Tommy couldn't finish, but the implications were clear. Crawford listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. When Tommy finished, the marshal was quiet for a long moment. "Son, I want you to know how brave you are for speaking up. What happened to you was wrong, and it wasn't your fault. But nobody believes me," Tommy said. "Everybody in town thinks I'm lying. That's because Blackwood has spent years building a system designed to protect himself," Sarah interjected. She opened her portfolio again, spreading documents across the pew. "Marshal, I've been able to confirm 3 more cases since we last spoke." Crawford examined the papers carefully. "This is more extensive than I realized, but we're going to need more than circumstantial evidence to bring charges against someone with Blackwood's influence." "What kind of evidence?" Rancher asked. "Physical proof. Witnesses who are willing to testify, something that can't be dismissed or explained away. Sarah and Crawford exchanged a meaningful look. There might be something, Sarah said slowly. In my investigation, I discovered that Blackwood keeps trophies, items taken from his victims. If we could find them, you're talking about breaking into his house, Rancher said. I'm talking about finding evidence of multiple crimes, Crawford corrected. Evidence that could put Blackwood away for life and give justice to all his victims. Tommy looked up suddenly. The pocket watch. What? Sarah asked. The one they said I stole. Mr. Blackwood showed it to me when I was in his house. Said it belonged to another boy who used to visit him, but the boy had died in an accident. Crawford and Sarah exchanged glances. Can you describe this watch? It was gold, with initials carved on the back. JM, I think. And there was a picture inside. A woman with dark hair. Sarah rifled through her papers, pulling out a newspaper clipping from 2 years earlier. Jacob Morrison, age 9, died in a riding accident outside Millbrook. His mother reported that his father's pocket watch went missing around the same time. Morrison, Crawford repeated. Any relation to your sheriff? His nephew, Rancher said grimly, which explains why Morrison's so eager to protect Blackwood. The pieces were falling into place, but they still needed proof. Crawford outlined a plan that was both simple and dangerous. While he created a distraction by serving Blackwood with a warrant for questioning, Sarah and Rancher would search the mansion for evidence. What about me? Tommy asked. You stay here, Rancher said firmly. It's too dangerous. But I know the house. I know where he took me, where he might keep things. Crawford considered this. The boy has a point. If there's a hidden room or safe, he might be the only one who knows where to look. Despite Rancher's protests, it was decided. Tommy would guide them to the mansion, but would stay outside while the adults searched for evidence. They moved through the night like shadows, approaching Blackwood's mansion from the rear. The building loomed against the sky, its windows dark except for a single light in what appeared to be a study on the second floor. Crawford approached the front door while Sarah, Rancher, and Tommy circled to the back. They could hear raised voices from inside as Crawford presented his warrant, Blackwood's smooth tones contrasting with the marshal's official demands. There, Tommy whispered, pointing to a basement window. He took me down there, said it was his special room where he kept his most precious things. The window was unlocked, a sign of Blackwood's arrogance and confidence that no one would dare challenge him. Sarah slipped through first, followed by Rancher. The basement was finished in dark, wood paneling with expensive furniture and artwork that seemed oddly out of place in an underground room. But it was what they found in a locked cabinet that made their blood run cold. Dozens of items, jewelry, toys, pieces of clothing, each carefully labeled with a date and initials. The pocket watch Tommy had described was there, along with a small shoe that matched the description of a missing child from 3 towns over. My God, Sarah breathed. He's been doing this for years. They gathered as much evidence as they could carry, but as they prepared to leave, they heard footsteps on the stairs above. Blackwood's voice, no longer smooth and controlled, echoed through the basement. I know you're down there. Did you really think you could break into my home and steal from me? The basement door slammed shut, and they heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. They were trapped. There's another way out, Tommy called from outside the window. The coal chute. It leads to the side of the house. But as they climbed toward freedom, Blackwood appeared at the window above, a shotgun in his hands. "You've made a terrible mistake," he said. "All of you." The shot shattered the night air, but it went wide as Marshal Crawford tackled Blackwood from behind. The two men struggled, and in the confusion, Sarah and Rancher escaped through the coal chute with their evidence. By dawn, it was over. Blackwood was in federal custody, the evidence was secure, and word was spreading throughout Millbrook that their most powerful citizen was actually a monster who had preyed on their children for years. The townspeople who had turned their backs on Tommy now came forward with their own stories, their own suspicions that they'd been too afraid to voice. Sheriff Morrison was arrested as an accessory, and several other officials who had helped cover up Blackwood's crimes were removed from office. 3 months later, Rancher stood in the courthouse in Denver, watching as Charles Blackwood was sentenced to life in prison. Tommy sat beside him, no longer the frightened, broken child who had made that first brave accusation in Millbrook's dusty street. "What happens now?" Tommy asked as they left the courthouse. "Now we go home," Rancher said, "to our ranch, our family, because that's what they had become. A family forged in the crucible of injustice and tempered by their shared courage." Rancher had legally adopted Tommy, and together they were rebuilding not just their lives, but their faith in the possibility that good could triumph over evil. Sarah Chen's articles about the case had indeed gone viral, sparking a national conversation about the protection of vulnerable children and the corruption that allowed predators to operate with impunity. Her investigation had led to federal reforms and the establishment of new protocols for investigating crimes against children. As they rode back toward Millbrook, toward home, Tommy looked up at the man who had risked everything to protect him. "Do you think there are other kids out there who need help?" Rancher smiled. "I'm sure there are, son. And when they need someone to stand up for them, maybe we'll be ready to help." The sun was setting over the Colorado Territory, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. It was the same sun that had witnessed Tommy's first terrified accusation, Rancher's decision to protect him, and all the dark days that had followed. But now it illuminated something different: hope, justice, and the unshakable truth that sometimes, when good people refuse to stay silent, even the most powerful predators can be brought to justice. In Millbrook, children played safely in the streets again, their parents no longer afraid to speak up when something seemed wrong. And in a modest ranch house 5 miles outside town, a man and a boy who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances were building a life based on courage, truth, and the revolutionary idea that every child deserved protection. The story that had begun with a whispered accusation had become a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. And in a world that often seemed dominated by those who would abuse their power, it was a reminder that heroes could emerge from the most unlikely places, sometimes in the form of a lonely rancher who simply refused to let a child suffer in silence. Justice had prevailed, but more than that, a family had been born from the ashes of tragedy. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.